Hi there, I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to interCHANGE. Thank you so much for joining us. I think you'll find the conversation today pretty interesting. We'll talk about the ongoing soap opera involving Milwaukee Police Chief Ed Flynn, local journalist Jessica McBride, and her husband, former Waukesha attorney Paul Bucher. We'll talk about the many Milwaukee County supervisors who voted against Scott Walker's budget, even though they were flooded with calls urging them to support it. And we'll talk about whether it's time to make pot possession legal. And we will also talk about the Bucks News superstar, Brandon Jennings. All right, joining us tonight are Kevin Fischer, aide to Republican State Senator Mary Lozick, and oftentimes a host over at WISN Radio. Joel McNally, newspaper columnist and host of the Morning Magazine program on AM 1290. And Gerard Randall, longtime job creation expert. Rick Horowitz, along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, the first thing we'll talk about is the very public accusation by former Waukesha County District Attorney Paul Bucher that Milwaukee Police Chief Ed Flynn is still having an affair with Bucher's wife, Jessica McBride. Flynn denies it. Bucher has filed for divorce again. McBride says nothing. The whole thing is salacious and sad, Joel.
And public. I mean, when a marriage breaks up, there are always, a lot of charges back and forth, and usually we don't have to witness them. They're between the parties. Truth of the matter is, I was sort of suspecting before that one of the two parties in that marriage had kind of leaked the original story just to get at the other one. Now I think it's pretty much confirmed because now you have the former district attorney out in Waukesha clearly going to the gossip columnist at the Journal Sentinel to put out some stuff about his now again. Yeah, he filed for divorce once and then withdrew it within a week, and now he's filed again, and they're going through a lot of turmoil, and it's ugly. If the police chief weren't in the middle of it, I don't even think it should be in the newspaper, but because the police chief's in the middle of it, it pretty much has to be. Before the police chief admitted, what he had done and apologized to the public and apologized to the city, and I've got no reason to think that this time he would be lying when he says that no, it's really not. Anyone can make a mistake, maybe if you're from out of town and don't know the players. And there's a woman who's sort of famous for this sort of thing that you get involved in. But he, his eyes were wide open, I think, after that, and I just think this is a personal thing in the breakup of a marriage that is being put out in the public just for spite between the parties, and I just don't, I feel real uncomfortable with it. I don't think there's any public issue at this point.
I think it's very odd how some people are saying, well, Flynn should resign, Flynn should resign. I don't think this has anything to do with how he does his job.
No, and evidently the mayor and the Police and Fire Commission hold to that view that this is not something that they're prepared to dismiss him over. Love makes you do strange things, though. Really? And as evidenced by the former...
Love is strange.
Yes, it is. District attorney who has decided that once again he's going to bring this out into the public venue. The really sad thing is that it's become a distraction again for the police chief. And it airs some failings, some domestic failings on the parts of both he and the DA and his wife. I don't think none of them want to see this whole thing replayed again. She just had gotten over the hump with regards to her job. And certainly with UW Milwaukee, that's one of those issues that I think is certainly not going to be helpful to her being able to teach students there, because that's something that they will certainly want to have some conversation about, or if they're not already talking about it down on campus. And certainly in the back rooms around coffee, some of her colleagues are probably having a conversation about it too. The folk who believe that the chief has some moral responsibilities are certainly talking about it as well, and I think that's what kind of brings up this whole conversation about whether he should remain in office or not. I'm not one of those. While I think it's an ugly situation, it's still a private situation. There's certainly a lot of precedent around the country. Rudy Giuliani, for example, his life got played out in public. Bill Clinton's life got played out in public while he was president for his marital failings. These kinds of things certainly don't limit one from being able to do a good job in another arena, but it's embarrassing, and it's something that frankly deters from their ability to stay focused on their jobs. When that happens, I think everyone is probably going to clamor for a resignation, but that certainly hasn't happened yet.
Kevin, somebody told me this morning, this shouldn't even be a news story. This isn't worthy of the news. I disagree. I think it is. When you're a public official, almost anything you do, I think, is fodder for a news story.
Yes, and as Joel said, the only reason it is a story is because these aren't your average citizens. You have a media personality on the one hand, and a police chief of a major American city on the other. No, it shouldn't be in the press. I mean,
And a former district attorney.
right, and a former district attorney. It shouldn't be, because a divorce is bad enough, and then to have every ugly, salacious detail plastered all over the news, that's tough to take, although there is an odd, weird fascination on the part of the news-consuming public to soak in as much of this stuff as possible. I'll give the chief this. If it is not affecting his job, and it doesn't appear to be, then there shouldn't be any clamoring for his resignation. On the other hand, and this has not been broached yet here this evening, what if Paul Bucher, if what he is saying is true? If Flynn is still running around with Bucher's soon-to-be ex-wife after he apologized and said it wouldn't happen again, then you have serious questions of immorality that would, I think, legitimize calls for his resignation, for him stepping down. This is very sad and unfortunate, but it's the times we live in. We can't get enough of this stuff when it comes to these ugly personal stories about people that we build up only to see this desire to tear them down.
All right, next topic. The Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors this week went ahead and overrode a number of Scott Walker's budget vetoes, and in the end left us with a budget that raises the property tax levy here more than $5 million. This, even though they were flooded with calls from people backing Walker's no tax increase budget. I can't believe they had an equal number of calls urging them, please raise the taxes, raise the taxes. Well, why should, even if it was generated by Walker himself and talk radio and Citizens for Responsible Government, if this is who the supervisors heard from, shouldn't they have a responsibility to vote that way?
Well, there was more of a common sense approach that I think the board may have settled on more so than what they were initially confronted with. I think it made perfectly good sense to have some outsourcing, the jobs around janitorial services in the courthouse being one of those. There were other areas, though, where I think the board was absolutely right in overturning those vetoes, some of those jobs in parks, for example. Those have been long-running battles around privatization and I think in some instances too much privatization. You can go too far in that direction as well. And the loss of some of those jobs where you could say you were going to lose people that had an awful lot of experience that it would be very difficult to replace. Some of that I don't think had been well considered. Overall, I think Walker came out pretty well in the deal, and that the county supervisors, especially the ones that had been targeted because they lived in suburban communities where CRG has a larger influence, I think they responded and they backed them on some of those things. I also think you have to look at the constituencies of some of those supervisors that overturned the veto. They heard from their constituents too, to be perfectly honest, and they didn't support all those vetoes that the county exec had put out there, and they responded in kind. So I think it was a targeted approach. Both constituencies could walk away and say they responded in some manner to the folk that called them up and had loud voices on both sides to either uphold those vetoes or dismiss them.
Kevin, one supervisor said she received 1,000 calls supporting Walker. Is it fair then to just dismiss those as,
No, you
oh, these
shouldn't.
are all crazy people?
No, you shouldn't. And no matter what the motivation was for these people to call in, if you want to point the finger at talk radio, which I think is foolish. Yeah, talk radio has a certain agenda. They have a certain political ideology and philosophy, but they can't lift somebody up by the collar and drag them to the telephone and say, you call the courthouse and you tell them this. Those people aren't mindless. They're not lemmings. They're not sheep. They're not blind sheep. And no, you should not dismiss them. You had some supervisors ridiculing them on the floor of the county board, calling them names. And I hope those constituents remember those supervisors who insulted them. You don't insult the voters. You do listen to them. You do take into consideration what their feelings are. And there were some supervisors who voted against or voted for Scott Walker's budget and then flip-flopped a few days later and voted to override all the vetoes. That makes absolutely no sense. There were terrible charges of racism made by some supervisors that were obviously false and atrocious. So I think some of these supervisors are in big trouble next time around because you do not insult the voters, especially when they're en masse and loud and vociferous. But there was a compromise. It worked. You had less of a property tax levy increase than the county board wanted, a little bit higher than what Scott Walker wanted. It did work. There was a compromise. And the county budget that Scott Walker put through is looking right now a lot better than the one that's sitting on Tom Barrett's desk, which is calling for a greater than 4% property tax levy increase.
So in the end, does Scott Walker win? Does he win some points?
No, well, I guess he won because he did what he wanted to do. He's campaigning for governor. And I think these phony citizen campaigns, and that's what it was a phony campaign. It was whipped up by an organized group. It's a lot like those things that took place last summer at the healthcare town halls that Congress people held, and you had a bunch of people show up and scream and yell and tell lies, and then business goes on because it was phony. There's nothing to it.
But why is that any more phony than the public employee union saying, tell them to vote for the budget?
Everyone has the right. Everyone has a right to express their opinion. But many of those things, and there were a number of programs. My wife was lobbying right up to the vetoes to overturn one of the vetoes.
She was successful.
And she was successful. It was a terrible veto. It was to veto an alternative to incarceration that saves the county money. Now, if Scott Walker really does want to cut taxes, you'd think he'd support a program which saves the county money. But so he makes his point. He gets to veto, here's an example, the Martin Luther King Community Center. Now, I wonder, where the Martin Luther King Community Center might be located. He knew the veto was going to be overridden. The chairman of the finance committee of the county board, it's in her district, and it's a beautiful facility. It's a great centerpiece to the community.
What are you saying, Joel? Just spit it out. He's a racist. Just spit it out.
I didn't say that, but I'm saying he made the point he wanted to make to some voters out there in Wisconsin somewhere. Look at me. I vetoed the Martin Luther King Jr.
He vetoed things on the south side, too.
Yeah, he did. He vetoed Kosciuszko Park.
Yep.
But the thing I was impressed about at the county board was, for the most part, there was one supervisor who I have to accept from this. Linda Bruin in the south suburbs actually flipped as a result of the pressure from this organized group. I don't think that showed a lot of courage or conviction on her part. I disagree. I think we elect county supervisors to make their decisions on the budget, and just because an organized campaign, targets you and says, let's, flood their telephones, that's not public opinion. It's the opinion of one group who it's been described as clowns for ridiculous government.
That you disagree with.
All right, next topic. Right now, they're talking about the possibility of making legal the medicinal use of marijuana in Wisconsin. But there are a great many people that say we should take that one big step further across the country and make possession of recreational amounts of pot perfectly okay. Out in Breckenridge, Colorado, a small town, voted to do just that recently. And it really kind of jump-started this whole national discussion again. Should we stop arresting people and stop jailing people and stop processing people for smoking a small amount of pot?
You know what? I can't get tools for treating diabetes without a prescription. Those little test strips, I need a prescription for it now, and it defies logic as to why a test strip requires a prescription. And here we're talking about a drug that is an illegal drug for right now. Its effects, some can debate whether or not they're purely recreational, whether or not they have harmful side effects that ultimately society pays a price for. I happen to fall on that side and still believe that it's something that, even though there might be money saved in the efforts to prosecute those people who possess small amounts of it, I think you open the door to other kinds of prosecutions that go by the wayside with regards to other recreational drugs as well. This, to me, is it's nonsense. And why they continue to bring it up time and time again as a way to save money, when over the long haul it will probably cost more money in terms of people's ineffectiveness on the jobs, because we have a lot of folk that would probably treat it as they do now, same way they treat alcohol, coming to the job without all their faculties as a result of recreational uses of drugs that have very limiting effects on their ability to perform well. I just don't think this is a smart move on the part of Breckenridge and on the part of any other government that looks to expand the use of it by limiting their enforcement of the law.
Kevin, and the folks who say, okay, the last 40 years has proven this is not a gateway to tough drugs, that people can smoke recreationally and live just fine.
But I think that's a long way off, even though you have this town in Colorado doing what it's going to do. The current larger issue of debate right now is whether marijuana should be legalized for medicinal purposes. And fueling that is this recent call by the AMA that there should be, and they're not saying that it should be legalized for medical use, but there should be a federal review. This is a very muddled issue. The president campaigned that he would not stand for federal intervention in the distribution of marijuana for medicinal purposes, and yet to this very day, the DEA is still doing raids on people attempting to use marijuana for medicinal purposes. Until there's definite, guaranteed scientific medical evidence that marijuana is of benefit for medicinal purposes, and until you can really put in ironclad, iron-proof safeguards, I'm not for it. What are you going to do like they do in Los Angeles and sell it over the counter? Are people going to be allowed to grow it in their basements or in their backyards?
Why not?
Which they do now.
I'm not sold yet. I'm not sold that this is a good idea.
I think in the next couple of years it'll be legal.
I wouldn't predict that, because I don't think the politicians have the guts to do it. I think it would be the intelligent thing to do, but what's intelligence got to do with politics? I would have bet 30 years ago, 40 years ago, that it would be legal right now. And the reason I would have bet that was because everybody I knew in law school smoked it. But, you know, hypocrisy, you know, apparently is no barrier. You know, we've had presidents, we've had Supreme Court justices, we have people in responsible jobs throughout society who at some point has smoked marijuana. It's a huge waste of police resources, of our criminal justice system, of our prison system. We have people in prison, and a huge number of people in prison in Wisconsin for nonviolent drug use that involves marijuana. I went to a training session at the police academy and talked to Vice Squad people, and I said, what is the main drug you arrest people for in Milwaukee? And they said marijuana. And I said, why? You know, there isn't anybody who thinks that that is the best use of our police resources, even to pursue drugs in the community.
Including the president, but his DEA is still going around arresting people.
But the point is, it's easy to do, so we'll do it. We'll arrest people. We know that, you know, all kinds of people in our society have smoked marijuana and had no ill effects in their lives. They may end up being 40 years old and living in the basement with their parents, but aside from that, you know, there are no long-term effects. and we should target something much more serious. We should use our law enforcement, apparatus for serious crime.
Look at what
Joel,
we're trying to do with drunk driving right now. I mean, and we're trying to create greater penalties for those who are driving impaired. This would be another drug that would impair one's ability to operate a vehicle effectively, and you wouldn't be able to detect it as easily.
And it is considered, you can't diminish the effects of marijuana. It is considered the most restrictive controlled substance, right up there with heroin and LSD. So you can't laugh off marijuana.
All right, shift gears for just a minute. Let's talk for just a few minutes about the Bucks' new superstar, Brandon Jennings. If you don't follow sports, you might not know how incredible this guy is. The other night, he scored 55 points in one game, didn't even score any points in the first quarter, breaking the all-time team rookie record that was held by Lou Alcindor.
Where did he come from? And no
Never
one
played
can.
college ball?
That's it. No one can absolutely convince me that the Bucks knew this is what they were getting when they put him on the roster. I think it's a stroke of good fortune for the Bucks and for the community because he brings some excitement to the game here, and at a time when we just found out Bogut will be out for a while. Michael Redd, he's been in and out of the game because of injuries. This is something that I think not just young, fresh talent, but healthy talent that's able to score some points, create some offensive excitement on that team. It's greatly needed.
So fast. Superstar. He's played 10 games, 55 points in one game, and he didn't score a point in the whole first quarter. I'll grant you that's terrific. Against Golden State, who doesn't play any defense. They just sit there and hope and pray that you miss your shot so they can go down the floor and score. I don't see long-term, although he is exciting to watch. I heard from people who have been there. I mean, he's quicker than lightning.
Yep.
He's quicker than lightning. He's very fast. But you don't win championships with little skinny shooting guards. You don't. And this Bucks team, God love them, is still, they're off to a pleasantly nice start because they are playing defense. They are out rebounding their opposition. But down the road, come on. I know I'm always.
Doesn't it make you want to go buy a ticket?
I'm always the one that has to speak with his head on this program when it comes to sports.
Guy.
I think they're one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference. I'm sorry.
Is he good enough to carry the team?
He can't carry the team, but he doesn't have to carry the team. Michael Redd will come back, and they can't double team both of them.
But there's only one basketball.
And right now they have to.
There's only one basketball.
I want to pay tribute to Steve Haywood from ESPN Milwaukee. I interview him once a week on the radio about sports. He said before the season started, this guy is a superstar. He knew it. He saw it, and he said, you got to get to the Bradley Center. You got to see this guy. And I did see him. And I missed the 55 game, but I saw him the next game, the Dallas game, when he, had a kind of an off night, but ended up scoring 25 points and almost winning the game in overtime against the Dallas Mavericks. He is exciting. It's a lot of fun, and I think that the Bucks really did have a pretty good idea what they were doing. They really, and think of that. There were 9 general managers that passed on this guy before we picked him at the number 10 spot, and all over the country right now, those 9 general managers are saying, "How did we?"
Well, let's
that?
see what he does against the Bostons, the Los Angeleses, the San Antonios. Let's see what he does.
Buy a ticket.
He is not a
Buy a
superstar.
ticket.
Dan Jones, please. Who wrote that intro for you, Joel?
I did. And finally, big controversy on the medical front this week. A government task force said that women shouldn't routinely have mammograms starting at the age of 40, but should wait instead until they're 50. They also recommended against teaching women how to do regular self-examinations to try to detect breast cancer at an earlier stage. And now, new recommendations about waiting longer before getting pap smears to test for cervical cancer. Plenty of confusion, even anger out there. Do we seem to be getting more and more of this conflicting medical advice lately? Rick Horowitz thinks so. Rick?
What we told you before, forget it. What we said you had to worry about, nope. What we advised you to get checked out on a regular basis, not so much. That thing that was always on your mind because we told you it should always be on your mind, well, we've thought about it some more, and now we don't think it should always be on your mind. Now and then maybe, but not always. Certainly not always. At least not until we think about it again. That thing that never even occurred to you to be concerned about because we kept telling you that it was nothing to be concerned about, you might want to be a little more concerned about it. Maybe even a lot more concerned about it. We're not trying to cause a panic, you understand. We're just giving you the benefit of the very latest information, which just happens to contradict the previous latest information. But this latest information is definitive. Absolutely. Until there's even later information. If you've been eating plenty of this and that because we kept telling you that this and that are good for you, you might want to scale back a bit. This is still pretty good for you, but that, we've got our doubts about that. Except for certain people, of course, where that is still pretty good for you, but we've got our doubts about this. It all depends. Bet you knew that. For that matter, that miracle drug you've been popping like candy for whatever it is you've got, because a drug this good for whatever it is you've got only comes around once in a blue moon, we probably should have mentioned the side effects, the other side effects. They're nothing to be alarmed about for most people. The rest of you should probably see your doctor in the next 12 hours. Or even a specialist, just to be on the safe side. And one more thing. Everything we're telling you now, it's the other way around for children under 6. Any questions?
Well, thank you, Rick, and thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Yeah, what were they thinking?
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting when the evening comes, watching the ships roll in